Well, dude, we just had an amazing conversation. And for those who heard the intro, they kind of know a little bit about you, Jamie. I probably already spilled some of the beans on some of the good stuff you shared in this episode. But man, like we've known each other for a little while now. And I have seen you go through a lot of different evolutions. And I think you kind of gave yourself a good name here. And you're kind of like the mad scientist of podcasting. If I had to describe people to you, you're always testing new things and you always have crazy ideas that like, and you do things that no one else is thinking about, man. So I'm probably going to butcher the name, but what we're going to talk about today is really around the 4 compound leverage pillars. I forget what you call them about podcasting. And I just want to like kind of share with people what you're doing to monetize and grow your podcast at scale. And yeah, man, I'll let you take the floor because this is really exciting stuff.
I'm super excited to talk about it. I was just chatting with Luis before, and what's kind of hilarious is I said, yo, dude, last week I slipped over in the shower and banged my head, and I had this like come to God moment, and I figured out this missing piece in our model, and I've been going crazy all week. So as we're recording this episode, just so you guys know, because of what this thing is that I've discovered that I'm about to share with you guys today, we're actually completely rebuilding our company from scratch. Like I'm closing my current company. We're opening a new company in Panama. We're giving it a new name. We've got, full, different steps. And so I'm currently very excited to share this because when I talked to Luis about this just before, like, dude, this is crazy. So what I want to do is, because there's so much I could compound and kind of go into, what I want to do is give you guys a really high level understanding of what our model looks like and help you understand, 1, how we monetize podcasts, 2, how we basically use our podcast as a client acquisition engine. And I want to talk about the compound leverage elements of this model. And, hats off to Alex Hormozi for even bringing my attention to this. Literally just a couple of weeks ago, he said one of the big reasons that he wanted to get out of the vehicle of Gym Launch is there was nothing in Gym Launch that compounded over time the way that money compounds. And when he shared this principle with me, I was like, wow, I didn't even realize, but we have 2 or 3 elements in our company which actively compound over time. As in, if we just keep doing what we're doing, it gets more and more powerful over time. And so what I want to share with you guys today is that this isn't for somebody that just has a podcast. This is specifically for a business owner that sells a high ticket offer that wants to use a podcast as their client acquisition engine. And just for you guys understanding, like I am not on social media at all, apart from, posting stupid videos of me surfing at the beach. I was able to completely step away from social media in January because I just got burnt out with it. And essentially now all we do to acquire customers in our business is this model that I'm about to share with you. And so what I want to cover is I want to cover 4 different elements of compound leverage that this model gives you. One of them is about compounding cash and essentially giving you revenue and sales from the activities you do with the podcast. And by the way, you don't even have to be the person that runs the podcast. Currently, I don't run my podcast that produces most of my revenue. So I'm going to share a bit behind the scenes on that. The second one is how you can build compounding leads into this acquisition model. And so basically everybody that actually comes through our client acquisition model today generates 1.5 times the amount of leads. So if we have 100 leads that come into our system, we generate 150 new leads just from referrals with the people that are in it. And so the second piece is the compounding leads. The third piece is actually something brand new. And this is what I want to share with you guys, which is compounded ad spend. With this model, you actually get free ad spend to actually go out and grow your podcast. And this is probably the craziest part of the model, which I love. And then the fourth piece is compounding talent. Because we're able to build such a great system, we're able to attract really high quality talent who is going to grow, and we're going to attract more people over time. So those are the 4 elements I want to dig in. Should we just like get straight into it, Luis, or any thoughts about that?
Yeah. I think we just dive right into it. Each component has a lot of nuances and a lot of things we can cover, but let's just dive right in, man.
Awesome. So again, I want to go top level because like Luis says, there's a lot of nuance into how we do this. Essentially, what we sell in our business is a system. And so I don't mind sharing with you guys the strategy here, because a lot of the time, the reason why people come and pay me money is they say, I love this. I can see it working for my business. Help me install the system. And that's essentially what we do. And so the very first thing is the entire principle of what we do. And we call this principle podcast closing. And it's very, very simple in how it works. A traditional podcast is essentially, for a lot of people, a nurture engine. You have leads, people listen to the podcast, The podcast nurtures them so that they trust you more, and hopefully they book a sales call and buy from you. And while that is a great model, if you have a lot of leads, the majority of people I speak to with brand new podcasts don't have a lead source. They don't have leads coming in every single day. And so how podcast closing works is that we essentially create a podcast where our goal is to make the podcast the lead generation engine and also the conversion engine. And so how it works is 3 very simple steps. Step 1 is we attract our dream customer actually as a guest on the podcast. So we're going to get them coming through. We're going to get them filtering through on our funnel so that every single person we interview on our show is our dream customer. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to give them an absolutely amazing experience. We're going to give them an amazing podcast episode. We're going to love on them. We're going to build an amazing relationship. Whether they decide they want to work with us or not, we're going to make them feel like it was massively worth their time to come onto our show. And then the third element, and this is where the podcast close comes into place, is at the end of the podcast interview, we're simply going to offer them the opportunity to get onto a sales call. And so we'll say something along the lines of, hey, I don't know if you'd be open to this, but I know when you came on the podcast, you were talking about the fact that you're struggling to scale and get more leads. If you're open to it, I'd love to have a conversation about how we can help you. Is that something you're open to? Totally okay if not. And so at the end, we make the offer to get onto a sales call. Now, this system is essentially what my whole business operates on. And it's a very different model of podcasting. But what we've been able to do with this is essentially create podcast interviews that turn into sales calls. And so we have 3 levels that we basically go through with this. Step 1 and phase 1 is that you build this system for yourself. So first, you got to get clear on the offer and make sure you understand who the dream customer is that you want to attract on the show. Right. Phase 2 is you want to build the system that attracts those people. So for us in our business, this looks like a funnel, email sequences that pre-sell people on why they want to potentially work with you, and all different automations so that when somebody comes through your podcast interview funnel, they are getting primed and ready to learn more about your business and be potentially interested in getting on a call. And so what we do is we, first of all, figure out the dream customer. We build the system so that when people come through this process, it's all automated. And then the third thing that we're doing is just completing podcast interviews and completing sales calls. So in the first phase, as a business owner, all you're going to do is you're going to go out and do 10 podcast interviews in a week. Usually, if you're doing 30-minute interviews, it's about 5 hours a week. And on average, we see our clients get about 50% of those turn into sales calls. So in the beginning, it's, 10 interviews, 5 sales calls, and usually you're going to close about 1 of those a week. So if you have a 5K offer, that's about 20K a month in revenue. And so that's fundamentally phase 1. As we go into phase 2, what we do then is we essentially replace you as the person doing the interviews with what we call a podcast setter. And this is what allows you to take that model and scale to 7 figures just with a podcast, is that we basically employ a full-time salesperson to do 20 to 30 podcast interviews a week and then book those sales calls. And so once we get this system down for you, we then install somebody to do those interviews for you, and you can start to scale the model that way. So that's the fundamental first bit of leverage, is that we are doing podcast interviews, we are creating content, we're generating sales calls, and that gives us cash and sales and revenue coming into our business consistently every single week. And this is all we do in our business right now. That's literally our model of how we get all of our customers.
I love that. I love that because it's very simple. If you, yes, you have to set the systems up and they have to be automated, but once they're up and running, you're focused on generating the calls and the interviews, which is not hard. And basically you're, living and dying on the systems. Like you're not worrying about people or anything else, which I think for a lot of people interviewing and booking is very manual, unfortunately. Right. But the way you guys have it set up as a system is really, really cool. And being on your podcast, I've seen this and I've been through it. So it's pretty,
and it's interesting because a lot of people, they worry about the traffic. They say, oh man, where am I going to get my guests from? And that's actually the easiest part, because the reason this model works so well is that the offer to come and get interviewed on a podcast is so good. People cannot get enough of it. So we get all of our traffic right now through 2 sources, a Facebook group and through partnerships via email. So, we'll have a partner and we'll say, hey, do you want to just tell your audience that we have a podcast? And you email and people come on the show. And it's a really easy way to get traffic. Right. And then the second thing is, once every 2 weeks, I'll go into 1 or 2 Facebook groups and I'll say, hey guys, I'm looking for some entrepreneurs with podcasts to interview. And those posts get 200, 300, 400, comments on them, and so we get leads super, super easy. And so that's what I really love about this system is that I don't have to do any lead generation. I don't have to go on Facebook. I don't have to do stories, write posts. I just go into a group. I put the same post I do every 2 weeks. I've done the same posts for months on end now, and people just flood to it and then they come through the system. So that's the first element, and it's kind of the building blocks of the rest of the leverage. So that's what we focus on for any new client that comes in is step one, before we add complexity, before we try and get more of these leverage pieces in, we start with simplicity. Have we got a podcast that turns podcast interviews into sales calls, and then we build on it from there. Right. So that's the first bit of leverage. Now, the second bit of leverage is actually a very small system that we put into our interview process, and it's our referral engine. And this is kind of crazy because it's literally 3 extra questions and 1 automated email that we were able to put into our podcast system. But on average, it basically double and a bits our lead flow. I know that's not a proper word, double and a bits.
That's a British word for sure.
Right. Essentially, every lead that goes into our system, we get 2.5 leads instead of the 1 lead, right? So every referral that comes in, there's 1.5 people that get referred. And the reason this system works so well is that, one, we have a very cool email. The way that we wrote the copy for it is kind of like Facebook did when they first launched. When Facebook first launched, they would send you an email that said, hey, Luis Diaz is on Facebook and wants to add you as a friend, and you would go on that email and you'd be like, yeah, I'm going to join. Well, we have the same email. It's like, hey, Luis Diaz recommended that you come onto this podcast, and we've built it in such a way that it's a really compelling email. But fundamentally, the reason why this referral engine works is that the offer is good. It's to come on a podcast. And so people want to invite other people to come onto a show. And so just by plugging in that 1 referral element, we've been able, just in the last 2 months, to get about 450 completely free leads. And the element that compounds with this is not just the lead flow, it is the goodwill that becomes associated with it. And I'll tell you what I mean by this. At a sales call 2 days ago with a guy that was 2 referrals down. So what I mean by that is that somebody came on the show and referred somebody, and that person referred somebody else. And this was the guy that I was on the call with. And he was like, Jamie, I can't believe we haven't got connected before now. I can't believe that you know so-and-so and so-and-so. Like, I can't believe we haven't chatted before now. Now, to be honest with you, those 2 people that came on, I didn't really know who the hell they were before we did the interview. But the compounded goodwill from a referral is absolutely huge, because that person that was on the sales call massively trusted me more in what I was offering him because he was referred by somebody that he knows. And in fact, not just 1 person, but 2 people. And so this is the other element of compounding that happens here, is that when we build in the referral engine, you compound the leads, but you're also compounding goodwill over time in terms of this. So that's the second bit of leverage that we plug in that basically makes the system really powerful. Now, this third bit of leverage is probably the part I'm the most excited about. I know that we talked about this before, Lewis. Before I jump into it, any thoughts on that? Or
on the previous 2 parts? Well, first of all, I think I'll highlight one thing. You mentioned you have a good offer. Getting on a podcast is a great offer. Okay. Right. It's really easy to sell. There is no selling, actually. It's just like, hey, it's like, do you want me to offer you value and exposure? Absolutely. Right. For free. Absolutely. So the fact that you have a great offer just makes this entire cascading, like everything else cascading down, is just like so much easier. So I think that's a really important thing to
It's the secret, really. That's why this model works, is because that offer to come on a show is so good. And just so you guys know, this isn't unique to me. It's not, because I'm the podcast guy. If you have your own podcast, you get the same benefit, because you're saying to somebody, hey, come on my podcast, and people intrinsically want to do that. It is a great offer. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Cool. So let's get to this ads thing. This is really
oh my gosh. This is what I slipped over on the floor. Basically, I ran in and out of my shower 4 times because this idea came into my head, and I slipped over and I banged my head. I'm lucky I didn't die. And okay, imagine me like walking up to heaven being like, damn God, that was the best idea ever. I can't believe it killed me before I could put it in.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
That would tell Lewis before you left so I can execute it.
Right. Man. So just to explain what this third bit of leverage is, I have to first explain how this model scales. And so around about a year ago, I was really stuck in my business because I wasn't doing this process for myself. And the reason I wasn't doing this for myself was that I initially had done all the interviews, but then I got really busy as a business owner. I was like, I don't have time to do 10 or 20 interviews a week. I'm busy running my business. And I got really stuck and I got really dejected because I was like, man, I'm not even doing my own method that I teach people. And then in January of this year, I did a podcast interview actually with one of your clients. He runs an 8-figure chiropractic company. Absolutely incredible guy. He's from New Zealand. His name is
James Nielsen Watt. Shout out to
exactly
James.
what I was going to say. James Nielsen Watt. I will send him this video. He was like, Jamie, this model's amazing. I'm going to get my sales guys to do it this week. I'm like, no, James, you don't understand. You do the interviews, not the sales guys. And he was like, nah, forget that. I ain't got time to do this. I'm going to get my 5 sales guys to do it. They got tons of time. And I came away from that interview and I was like, holy shit, you are so right. Why have I never thought of this before? And so after I had that interview with him, I was like, I'm going to go and hire people to do this for me. And so today in my business, we have 2 podcast setters. That's what we call them. And their full-time job is to do podcast interviews that turn into sales calls. Brittany is one of my podcast hosts. She's absolutely amazing. She lives with me in Costa Rica. And so the reason why my business is now scaling very, very quickly is that it's very, very easy for me to hire a really good salesperson, install them into a podcast, get them to do podcast interviews. And the outcome is that they book a lot of sales calls and they're all paid on commission. So we only make money. We only pay them if we make sales. And so it's a very lean, scalable model. And so the reason I mention that is that the reason this advertising piece works with the leverage I'm about to tell you about is because we can do so much volume of podcast interviews. And so just so you guys know, Brittany, who's one of my podcast setters, all day, every day, Monday through Friday, she does podcast interviews. You would cry if you thought about how many podcast interviews we output every week. So today, this week so far, it's Friday at 11 a.m. We have done 47 podcast interviews so far this week, which is a crazy amount of volume. But just know what we show people, and this is a bit counterproductive to probably what you teach people, Luis, but we teach people how to actually do those interviews without ever needing to edit them. So,
that's what I was going to ask you.
Right?
Yeah,
a lot of people are like, oh my God, this sounds like I'm creating a nightmare. So with the 60 interviews that we do every week, it only takes my assistant 30 minutes to actually publish all 60 of them. And, just to make it really simple, because we're low on time, the way we do it is we record them like they're live radio shows. So we just don't do any editing. So that's it. So we do it. And then the way that we insert the intros, you'll love this, Luis, is that we use dynamic ad insertion to insert the intros and the outros. And so we can do it for all the episodes at once in about 12 seconds. So anyway, that's the secret.
Well, so that's an important thing to mention, dude. Yeah. It's like when you do volume like that, you have to give up something. Like you can't be doing like a documentary style show and doing 60 of them. It's just impossible. You got to give up something. So I appreciate that.
Exactly. So the reason that this next bit of leverage works so well is because we are doing so much volume. And so this is how it works. Right now, Brittany is doing 30 podcast interviews every week. What we now are going to be offering our guests is the opportunity to promote their podcast episode. And what we're going to do is we're going to make them a special offer when they come through the podcast funnel. I'm going to say, how much money would you like to spend to promote your podcast episode? We will put 100% of the money towards advertising your show on actual podcasts. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do podcast advertising. So we're going to advertise on other shows. And so the great news about it is we say, hey, there's actually a minimum. We actually have to run at least $200 of advertising. Otherwise we can't do it. So how much would you like to do? Would you like to do 200? Would you like to do 500, or would you like to do $1,000 of advertising to promote your specific episode? And what we're going to do is, because I'm a bit of a funnel mad scientist, we're going to obviously make it a no-brainer offer. I'm probably going to give people some bonuses if they go for the highest option, to make it really, really compelling. And so what this does, guys, is it's really crazy. We've already tested this with one of our clients, and he's currently getting a 25% conversion. So 25% of the people that come onto his show want to pay at least $200 to promote the episode. Why? Because it's a great offer. They are self-interested. They want to promote their own show. A lot of them are probably like, oh, I've always wanted to do this. I just never knew how to do it. So I'm super happy to just give you the money and you do it for me. And so what this does is that if you're doing 30 interviews a week and 25% of people are paying you at least $200, that gives you 30 people every month, which times $200 is $6,000 worth of ad spend every single month. Now, just so you guys can understand the scale of what this means, for podcast advertising, it's pretty common to be able to get a subscriber for about $3. That's about the going rate. But, let's just underestimate and let's say, okay, it's going to actually cost us $5 to get a subscriber. That means that we're going to get 1,200 new subscribers to the podcast every month.
That's
now,
awesome.
Bear in mind, we're doing a lot of interviews, but let's just say, if there's an episode that goes out every day on the podcast, we'll assume that they're going to listen to, say, 6 episodes out of the 30 that we're going to do in a month if we do a podcast every day. That means that we're going to gain between 7,500 and 10,000 downloads every month for free. And so if you compound this out, essentially, just by doing this model, you're going to get, by the end of the year, around about 15,000 brand new subscribers, 15 to 20K subscribers, and your show is going to have between 60,000 and 100,000 downloads a month. That's 1 million podcast downloads a year. And so what's cool about this is that, step one, we're actually cash flowing, the show as it is. So with the Brittany show, if we install a podcast setter, she does 30 interviews a week. She books about 20 sales calls. It's about a 60 to a 70% conversion rate. So we're usually closing about 3 to 4 clients every single week on that show. Mm-hmm. So if we have let's say it's a $6,000 offer, we're basically generating $100,000 a month from the podcast just from the sales calls that come in. And so with this model, essentially what we've created is we've got a show that you don't have to run, that requires absolutely no editing, that generates $100,000 a month, so 7 figures a year. And within 12 months' time, we'll have had so much free advertising that it actually will be a 1 million download podcast. And so if you think about this from a leverage perspective, why would I not make 10 of them? That's exactly what I'm going to do. And so by the end of, the next 3, 4, 5 years, our 5-year vision with this, we call it the 7-7 vision. 7-7-7 vision is we want 7 podcasts that are producing 7 figures in revenue, each with 7 figures in download by December 2027. That's our 5-year goal. So I'm not going to talk about the 4th piece of leverage because I know we're running out of time, but it's essentially talent. By having such a great offer, we can, get really good people coming into the business. That's the model. That's what we're helping people to do. And it's what we're doing with our own show as well.
Dude, I love it. I've got one question that's in the back of my mind and probably my listeners' mind as well. And that is on the advertising piece. So is there a specific advertising platform that you're running ads to, or is it Facebook? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah. So really interesting is that we actually experimented with this. We ran ads on Facebook and they performed like dog shit, to be really honest. Like we tested $1,000 worth of ad spend driving people to listen to a podcast episode. And we got like 5 downloads or something crazy like that. Like it was just not effective.
Horrible.
So what we do instead now is that we actually run advertising specifically on podcasts. And so there's a lot of ways you can do this. There's a lot of podcast platforms like Overcast, Castbox, and these, podcast platforms where you can run advertising through the platform. What you can also do is feed drops. So I could say, hey, Luis, what's up? Can I put a podcast episode on your show and I'll just pay you to get that exposure? And so an episode of mine goes in your feed for 2 weeks and then it gets deleted. And you can also do, just regular old podcast advertising shout outs. I could get somebody who has entrepreneurs in their audience and I could say, hey, I'm going to give you, $100 for every 1,000 downloads. Can you give me a shout out in the middle of your podcast? And so we can do all sorts of different types of advertising. But the secret here is that podcast people listen to podcasts. Right. And so what we want to do is we want to put all of our advertising into the podcast basket because our goal here is to get listeners on the show. So that's how we do it. And that's actually very good for our guests as well, because instead of just running ads on Facebook, which doesn't really impact them, they don't really get a lot of benefit from that. We're getting genuine podcast listeners who are listening to their episodes. So it's massively valuable for them. But over time, our show grows and compounds.
Yeah, got it. Dude, I love that model. And the fact that it's so scalable, and it just, like you say, it compounds leverage. I did literally a TikTok video on compounding. And the reason why I like podcasting is for the leverage you can use it. And I didn't even touch on any of these points as you mentioned. So dude, great episode. So where can people find out? What's the one place we can send them to learn more about what you guys do and more about your show?
Well, the best way to understand how this works is to see it in action. And so just so you guys know, if you come through our podcast funnel, you're going to come onto our show, you're going to get interviewed, and we're going to offer you a sales call. And then on the back end, we can chat and see if this works for you. But I actually really recommend, if you're interested in doing something like this for yourself, go and experience this process, and then let's have a conversation afterwards. So all you need to do is go to top100interview.com, and you'll be able to go to our podcast landing page. You'll be able to apply to come onto our podcast. We'll actually get you on the show. We'll have you as a guest. We'll give you value and exposure. And then at the end of it, we'll really just ask you, hey, are you curious to know more about how we can help you with this? If you're not, no worries. You just came on our show. If you are, great. We'll have a sales conversation.
Cool. Love it, man. Thanks so much for your time, Jamie. And dude, this is awesome. You're really changing things up in the podcasting game. So I value your friendship and value your time.
Dude, I love this. It's so fun. I just love to hang out and geek out on you with like the podcasting ideas. It's super fun.